Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I'm a core alignment coach, an emotional wisdom training specialist, and a diversity educator for many years. You have to excuse my voice today. I'm nursing a sore throat, so it's a little, you can hear, it's a little off. I design and deliver training to help organizations, entities, groups learn to recognize patterns of biases that hurt everyone. If they hurt one group of people, they are actually hurting all of us in different ways. And if you want to see the programs I design and deliver with arrangement, you can go to my website, knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress.com. You can also find me on Instagram at It's Your Show Voice. And before I introduce my guest today, who has an amazing experience, I want to thank our sponsor, Calvin Handy Public Safety Consultants. The president of Calvin Handy Public Safety Consultants is Calvin Handy, and he has over 30 years of experience as a police officer. He retired as Chief of Police Emeritus after working on 2 different campuses, UC campuses in California, and can help any organization. He's currently working with schools, which is sorely needed. His help is sorely needed and fantastic. He's a fantastic thinker and collaborator to help design gun violence prevention and strategic response to gun violence. So I highly recommend you email Calvin Handy at, Calvin Handy PSC, Public Safety Consultants at gmail.com. You can also find him on LinkedIn. So thank you very much again, Chief of Police Emeritus Calvin Handy. Now, today is Yom Kippur, which is so fitting for the topic we're having. I'd like to read a statement that actually President Biden made today about Yom Kippur and why it is the holiest day that Jewish people celebrate around the world. And I want to first bring Anoosh Jorjorian in. Anoosh is the director of Yolo Rainbow Families, which is a project of the Davis Phoenix Coalition. Anoosh has been an activist and organizer since 1990 when they were in high school, and in response to the beginning of the Gulf War. I remember that time so clearly, and it definitely tore my heart apart too, and sprang a lot of us in action where we were. Anoosh is also a freelance writer and a board member of the Gender Spectrum, and there's so much I'm looking forward to talking to you about. Anoosh, please come on in, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Bahia. I really appreciate you bringing me on, and I'll try to do as much talking as possible.
Save my throat, thank you. And I know your work focuses on is intersectional.
Yes.
And as you have spelled out to me before, meaning it encompasses a variety of different the intersection of many forms of oppression and violence. And you want to list the
Sure. I think probably the best thing is for me to start out with how Davis Phoenix Coalition was founded. It was actually founded by a woman named Gloria Partida, and she has 3 children. Her first child has a disability. Her other 2 children belong to the LGBTQ plus community. And unfortunately, her son was brutally beaten here in Davis, California, in an anti-gay hate crime to the point where they were very much afraid that he wouldn't survive. He did, in fact, survive. And in the wake of that hate crime, Gloria founded Davis Phoenix Coalition in order to fight against hate crimes. Now, obviously, Gloria is Latina, and her children are as well. And so the entire, like the establishment of Davis Phoenix Coalition was already happening at these intersections of identities of sexuality and race. And that tradition continues today. So while Davis Phoenix Coalition is largely known for supporting the LGBTQ plus community in Davis and in Yolo County, we also do projects that support communities of color and particularly Spanish-speaking immigrants.
Thank you for explaining the origin of it. And we have had the honor of having Gloria on our show probably at least 3 times. She's a phenomenal human being and has done so much good work and continues to do so every single day. So it's wonderful to meet someone else under the umbrella. So
yeah,
yeah.
Gloria was an integral part of my introduction to Davis when I moved here in 2016. I moved from Los Angeles, so coming to Davis, which is considerably smaller and slightly different makeup than Los Angeles. That was a bit of a culture shock. But meeting Gloria and learning about the Phoenix Coalition really made me feel at home right away.
Wonderful. And when did the Yellow Rainbow Family Project develop out of the Phoenix Coalition?
So that had been a pre-existing program before I arrived. I'm not quite sure when it began, but because, you know, I'm queer, I'm a parent, I wanted to go to the Yellow Rainbow Families meetings, and so I started showing up. And I did notice that Gloria seemed a little overwhelmed with everything that she had going on. And so I offered to coordinate the group for her. And she took a deep sigh of relief and said, that would be great. So originally, Yolo Rainbow Families was founded in order to support LGBTQ plus parents. This was, you know, I'm assuming that it basically started before marriage equality. And so especially same-sex, same-gender couples faced a lot of challenges in terms of, you know, sometimes conceiving and or adopting, establishing guardianship and adoption for both parents. This used to be a very long and complicated process, and people needed support around these issues and needed community so that they could compare notes and say, you know, this is what we did, you know, what did you do, what lawyer did you use, what do you advise, these kinds of things. So once marriage equality happened, however, this process was a lot less complicated because it's all covered once, you know, parents can get married, and then, you know, it's understood that the children belong to both of them. So there was less of a need by the time I arrived in 2016 for same gender parents to have that kind of support. And there were fewer of those. And instead, what we were seeing was a lot of parents who were either part of the community or who were heterosexual and cisgender, but who had children who belonged to the community, and particularly children who were coming out as gender expansive in one way or another. So that being either trans, and which is typically thought of as a child who changes to a different gender than the sex they were assigned at birth, or for non-binary. And folks who are non-binary may identify as trans, or they may just define themselves outside of the traditional gender binary altogether.
Thank you. Can you say more about that, about gender expansion and the gender spectrum? Because I still think it's relatively new to so many people.
Absolutely.
And a lot of confusion and ignorance, and you know, under you know, no shame. But I hear a lot of people asking questions that are like really supportive people, and just confused and don't understand because it is not something they grew up with. So can you say more about if someone mentions gender spectrum or gender expansion, can you sort of like paint the picture of a spectrum?
Absolutely. And before I begin, I just want to specify that there has been such an explosion of gender identities in the past 10 years that a lot of LGBTQ folks from my generation, and I'm Gen X, are themselves confused about what kind of gender identities the kids are using these days. And so I've even had, members of my generation and older making some of the uninformed complaints that I have heard from cisgender and heterosexual folks of like, there's too many, labels these days, and I can't keep up, and I don't understand what these things are. And and what I want to say to that, first of all, is that it's very normal for gender identities to evolve and change over time. They may not be happening in your circles, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening, and it doesn't mean that it's not valid. So, and it is difficult. It absolutely, I want to acknowledge that it's difficult to keep up with it all. I am lucky in that I have a teenager, and also because I work with teenagers, I am kind of in the stream of it, which allows me to more or less keep up, but I still have to look things up myself and ask kids, what does this mean to you? So having said that, don't feel embarrassed if you feel out of your depth. You are not alone. And there are folks who are very happy to help and help you understand, so that you can feel more comfortable in this new milieu of gender identities. So typically what we think of as gender is what we call a binary, where you have male and you have female, and they are separate and they don't overlap, and they're just, you have a choice of A or B, and that's it. And so even from birth, this is not actually how the world works, because when children are born, in many cases, they are assigned either male or female at birth. But we do know that there are babies who are born intersex, whose genitalia, whose sex organs, and or whose genetics don't fall in that XX, XY male female binary. So even from the beginning, a lot of people think, oh, these expanded genders, they're not natural. So the simple fact is, nature is not a binary on this issue. And so part of our community struggle has been the struggle for intersex folks to have the right to define their own gender when they're old enough, as opposed to what has happened typically, which is that a doctor decides at the moment of birth whether that child will be male or female, and in many cases will do surgery in order to make that child's genitals fit that sex that the doctor has assigned, without, the baby yet being able to conceptualize, like, who am I, and how can my body fit how I feel inside. So that's even from the beginning, when we're talking about genetics, when we're talking about like people's physical appearances, it's not a sharp dividing line. So when we talk about the spectrum, we think about female being on one end of the spectrum, male being on the other, and then there is this space in between where people can inhabit and move. So somebody could be, feel very masculine, but also, decide they're feminine in some ways, vice versa, or somebody could be in the middle and decide that they really aren't towards one side or the other. But even now, like, this is becoming less of, just like a linear spectrum between 2 points. And instead, it's becoming more like a web, where kids can really kind of think about gender in multiple dimensions and try to find what is the exact right term that fits them. And I, in fact, identify now, I came out a couple years ago as gender fluid, which means that I don't feel like my gender is fixed. I still identify as a woman, which is confusing to people because I identified as a cisgender woman for a really long time. And woman has very distinct experiential and political implications about it that are very much defined by a lot of experiences that I've had, from negative experiences like sexual harassment to positive experiences like having been pregnant and given birth and breastfed, things that are not necessarily, women's activities, but have been defined as such for a very long time in our culture, and especially during my life. But being queer, I also have the specifically lesbian concept of butch and femme genders, which is specific to the lesbian community and the queer woman community. And so for me, I move between those genders. And that is, and as well as being non-binary and also being agender, where I feel like I just opt out of gender completely. And so moving between those genders from day to day is just part of who I am. And thankfully, we now have a term that perfectly fits the way that I feel.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That is just really informative. And I want to go back to a couple things. One is, like, it's just kind of wild when you mentioned doctors assigning a box, a category for us to be in. And of course, we know, like, there were functional reasons. We know traditions stick and become institutionalized for years, but it is kind of wild to think about your one's life trajectory determined by, like, a complete unrelated stranger who is there at the moment you were born, and the incredible lifelong consequences that has on us.
Yes.
So I just appreciate, like, so I love these conversations because it's just so stimulating to expand the framework and the concepts, and to bring in new thoughts and new perspectives. And I also appreciate the extent of gender fluidity that you shared and explained, and how, and like, and really the term multidimensional, I think that's what you said, right? Multidimensional. Before going into gender fluidity, like a web. That's like, wow, like, whoa, brain, catch that concept. And it's, and again, it's just so wild, meaning not what we were taught and conditioned to believe. And I do find it fascinating, and I love glimpses outside of our conditioning, because it just, I feel like it expands my worldview. And I was with a group of people, probably, I don't know what generation, but definitely past teens, who were trying to sort of, like, grappling and struggling and getting a little bit stuck on language. And again, I think it's important to compassionately listen and not judge. Of course, I have, things I say, I step on people's toes, I miss things. I want people to be compassionate with me, ideally, when they're trying to communicate, hey, Bahia, open your mind, or you don't get it, let me tell you again. So I tried to extend the same, especially in as a trainer. And when I do trainings, I actually teach a communication method to try to communicate across differences and all that. And they were just sharing the confusion of like, all I mean is I get so confused. I can't make they not plural. I get so confused if you tell me they are coming over. I can't help it. And I'm not trying to defend this position or dig it in deeper, but it was a great opportunity to just share like with this whole group of people. Like, isn't it amazing that people are giving us this opportunity to like reconsider how they feel.
Mhm.
um, and actually the whole group kind of got quiet and thought about it. I said, just think of consider the potential freedom of being categorized or locked into a box that maybe you never consciously felt. Just sit with that for a minute and think about picture times in your life and places in your life, or categories or boxes that you were stuck in, that you can perhaps relate to this feeling of like, isn't it kind of liberating? So, and the response was really positive, and no one was trying to shut down that idea.
That's great. Yeah, there's two things that I want to kind of pull out from what you said. One is that, a lot of folks are also confused and very concerned about the fact that kids are coming
Mm,
out trans and non-binary at very early ages, and think that somehow through parent pressure or peer pressure that these kids are, you know, actually doing this in order to please someone
mm,
rather than doing it out of their own internal process. And I have to say, I am privileged in having, been coordinating Yellow Rainbow families for what is it now, like 6 years, that I've watched a lot of kids come out and at various ages. So as early as 3 years old and, all the way up into teens. And I cannot, like, in a lot of ways, in order to really grasp how authentically these children are expressing themselves, you really need to see it happen
mm,
because these kids, it's like the word that I keep using is that when they come out as trans or non-binary or whatever, they feel, whatever gender they feel is true to themselves, they bloom. And that runs the spectrum from toddlers who were acting out a lot and were unhappy and were being very difficult, who, once they come out, are just, much happier day to day, more relaxed. Um, a lot of their behavioral issues calm down because they're being affirmed in who they are. And, I think a lot of people have become familiar with the story of kids who are depressed to the point of being suicidal. And when they do come out, and if they are affirmed, then their suicidal impulses completely disappear. And so, one of the things that I really appreciate having, um, since I am a parent and I did give birth to my children, is that even before I really understood about how early kids can come out and really know themselves, was that I could, I learned for myself to what extent my kids have been themselves since they were babies, since basically day one. And so their personalities have been consistent, obviously maturing, and yet consistent from that first day. And when I see kids come out, it is, to me, it's like you can see where being kind of pushed into a gender that they feel did not fit for them kind of pulled them away from themselves, and then coming out pulls them back to themselves. And they are just more solid in themselves, happier, more content, more centered. Um, there's just an enormous difference. And to allay a lot of people's fears too, a lot of people think, well, once your child comes out, if your child's coming out at 3, does that mean they're starting hormones at 3? No. Um, Secondary sex characteristics don't develop until puberty. No one changes anything until puberty, so like kids go through the same, development process, and then part of comes out as trans before puberty. Then luckily in California, we can go see an endocrinologist, start talking with them, and monitor when the child begins puberty. And then there's usually a period of hormone blockers, which simply delay puberty a bit in order for that child to watch their peers go through puberty and understand more fully what kind of puberty they want to go through. And so when done correctly, which thank goodness in California, we have a lot of resources in order to do this. We honor the child's wishes and we give the child space to decide. So this process is very child-led, and we are giving the child an opportunity to like see and understand what going through puberty means, what the end result of puberty will be, so that they can really understand, well, how do I want to be perceived as an adult? What do I want to look like? Who do I want to attract? These all play into how children make these decisions. And it's not, it's not one thing or the other. It's not all hormone replacement therapy and surgeries. Different kids will choose different paths. And there are people who, for example, identify as trans women and they don't take hormones and they don't do surgery and they still identify fully as women, dress in the clothes that fit how they feel in their bodies. And that is, they don't owe anyone the right to look convincingly like a woman in order to be a woman, because there are also, women assigned female at birth who don't look like women as people define it. I've known women with beards. There are women with chest hair. There's all these variations, again, in our natural appearance that belies this very culturally constructed idea of a binary. Oh, sorry, that was one thing I was thinking of. The other, when you were talking about, I'm trying to like not make you talk too much. The one thing I want to say about they is that, using they when you don't know the person's gender has actually been in use since the time of Shakespeare. So it's actually a long-standing characteristic of English language. And so, it does take time to adapt. And if you accidentally misgender someone, which is something that happens to those of us who belong to the community as well, sometimes we misgender ourselves. So it's, it is a mistake. It will happen. What makes a difference is whether you're trying and whether you improve over time. So making mistakes is understandable. Apologize, use the correct pronoun, move on, and just practice so that you do better next time. Because, it's absolutely forgivable to occasionally misgender someone. But if you're consistently doing it over time and you don't get better after having been corrected, then that seems to indicate on your part something that's holding you back from correctly gendering that person. That would be, something that person would need to investigate within themselves.
I would love to respond to that because I have had the great fortune of knowing several young people who have completely forgiven me every time I make a misgender, and it's just like I feel just so grateful for their their patience and their our continued relationship just really flourished despite my mistakes. And I say it's and clearly because I cared and I tried and they knew like I sincerely loved them and it's not intentional and they've been the impact's been reducing because of getting more and more conscious and getting
Mhm.
more and more practiced. And I think it's similar when someone says a microaggression or something that hurts someone based on race, um, or ethnicity or religion or accent or anything, that if we make an attempt to apologize, if we recognize it hurt someone despite our intention, take responsibility for it, hold ourselves accountable and just work on it because these patterns are really ingrained. And
Yeah.
it's really, I think it just helps us all move forward if we all can understand that and that there is a way to step out of the ingrained patterns. That's also what my coaching is all about,
Uh-huh.
neurolinguistic programming. And just, it's not as hard as we think. It's entirely possible to relearn. It doesn't mean forgetting the past or forgetting your beliefs, or it's very much actually aligning ourselves with our values, even with more clarity. So I think it makes life better as we learn to become more inclusive. We just feel better. Everything's better.
Yeah.
I, I, I do want to go back to, I appreciate you brought up the fear around not understanding when and how people will change, like might ask for actual, uh, using my non-medical terms, changing their bodies
Mm.
or you can put it in the right language, and I'll try to learn the right language. Um, that I have shared the fear myself of like, because I think of it myself, and maybe I was just more out of touch than other people are.
Mhm.
But if I think of myself at 13, 14, 15, I was actually really clueless about who I was. And I have this little um, fear. I just want to name it out loud because if I had it, I'm sure many other people have had it. Of like, what if someone changes their body, like gets the support, and I definitely want everyone to have every kind of support they want and need, and I'm grateful for the supports. But what if later on I regret that I've actually physically changed my body? I just want to say that out loud because I know
Right.
that's a fear too. So, do you have any
Yep.
thoughts for me to stop having that fear or to step into it and accept that's possible for some
So the
people?
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is that, what has been called detransition for folks who do choose HRT and do choose surgery, the process of regretting it and wanting to go back to the sex assigned at birth, that is extremely rare. So, out of the percentage of children who and young adults who choose to uh, affirm their identities and take those steps. Um, the incidence of people who regret that decision and try to go back is vanishingly small.
Great.
Um,
That's good to
so
hear.
yes, so gender is a process. It's not necessarily uh, an arrived at endpoint, which is why I came out, in my 40s, and there have been folks who come out in their 80s. Um, and so it's just something that continues to evolve. I have definitely had friends who originally thought they were trans men and did hormone replacement therapy, and did some surgery, and then later thought, being a trans man doesn't fit me. I'm actually non-binary. But the process of going through um, changing to a trans man was simply a step in that journey. So they don't have, when they decide, oh, wait, I'm actually non binary, they don't have regrets about
Mm,
having gone through the time of being a trans boy or a trans man. Rather, it was just part of the process to get them to the identity that they feel most fully fits them. And, and then the other thing I'll say is like, none of this happens all at once. Like, you can't, get HRT and do all your surgery and be done. Like, that is not how it works. Um, you know, People will start on HRT and doing HRT and like having all those changes happen to your body through hormones, it takes a while. And, and if we're talking about growing bodies, there's certain procedures that you don't want to do until you're fully grown. I'm trying to be delicate about this, and I also just want to say really quickly too, like, please don't ask any trans folks about like, what have you done to your body? That is incredibly rude. Anything that you not
sure.
ask someone cisgender about what kind of, what their genitals look like. Don't ask
Yeah.
a trans person that either.
I
So,
can't
but the
imagine, honestly.
yeah, I mean, you
But
would
apparently it happens, or you wouldn't have said
yeah,
that.
you would blush to hear the kinds of questions that people just go up
Mm.
and ask trans folks that they don't even know, um, that are just incredibly invasive. So just some common politeness, like Miss Manners politeness, will
Mhm.
protect you from making an error like that. Um, so the other thing that I want to say is that, cisgender people go through gender affirming surgery all the time. So there will be,
Mm. Hmm.
women who decide to
Good
augment their
point.
breasts.
Good
There will
point.
be women who change, how their vulvas look. There's just all different ways that cisgender people will change the way their bodies look in order to feel more feminine or more masculine. Implants, all kinds of things. Like men might get implants in their pecs, for example. So why do we not even think twice about those kinds of gender affirming surgeries and augmentation? But then when it's trans kids
Mm.
and trans young adults, suddenly we're very alarmed by it. And then it's the same thing with hormone replacement therapy. I mean, I'm perimenopausal, and hormone replacement therapy is probably in my future. Um, and it is a tool in order to make our lives better. Um, and it is a tool that should be available to anyone for whatever medical reason that they need. And affirming your gender and affirming your identity, uh, that is part of medical care. It's part of physical health, it's part of mental health. So it's just like abortion, it's something that shouldn't be questioned because those are private medical decisions that should be made, for the person affected and their healthcare practitioners. And no one else really needs to be involved.
I appreciate that. And I realize it's a place of privilege to ask these questions. And I have also thought it would be a great deal of suffering, um, to be misgendered. I imagine would be cause a lot of suffering. And I've asked the question about, and again, this is totally out of privilege. Any kind of surgery um, that alters our bodies, regardless of the background. But that's just privilege. And hasn't been a part of my story, but it actually, um well, I don't want to go on about that, but I want to ask you now so we have about 10 minutes left
Mhm.
to share what you want to share about some of the like programs or um events
Mhm.
that you are part of organizing to help both prevent violence in communities and create inclusion.
Mhm. Okay. So
Switch.
I'm really proud of Davis Phoenix Coalition because we have so many fantastic programs going on right now. Um, so it's kind of a long list.
Good.
um, so one of the things I want to say is that, part of Davis Phoenix Coalition's mission in order to reduce hate crimes, and also bring marginalized communities into the center so that marginalized communities are included in all the decisions that affect them, that are so that people's voices that aren't normally heard get heard. A lot of what we do is supporting those communities. And so activities like Davis Pride and Yolo Rainbow Families and the Davis Queer Teen Group and our new program called Un Cafecito. These are all about providing peer support and socialization and community for these marginalized groups so that they feel supported, they feel like they are not alone in their experiences, and they have an opportunity to join their power, basically, in order to advocate for the things that they need. So obviously, most of that's with the LGBTQ plus community. Un Cafecito is with Spanish-speaking immigrants in Davis. So this is all about like helping people feel like their struggles are shared, and it helps clarify, what are the structural things that we need in order to feel less marginalized and feel more part of this community and feel more heard. And so we really have a base in terms of making a space for these communities to share experiences. And it helps us stay very grassroots, right? Because we are talking to the very people who are super affected, and we listen, and we help clarify and provide resources and outlets as things come up in these support groups. So that's one aspect of what we do. Another aspect is, this annually we have the Upstander Carnival, which is coming up on October 15th, I believe. Oh my goodness, I really should have this. I have so many dates in my brain that I'm a little bit discombobulated right now.
It's coming up soon.
It is coming up soon. So that is an annual event that we hold, and it's an event specifically for elementary aged children. And it's a variety of carnival type games that also teach children about differences in identities, and therefore like to be accepting and embracing of those varieties of identities, as well as helping them identify bullying and also have tools to be an upstander instead of a bystander when they see bullying. So that is on Saturday, October 15th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Davis's Central Park. And I will be there. And it's really, and we still need volunteers, by the way. So if anyone out there would like to volunteer, it's a fantastic event. And you have the most fascinating conversations with these elementary aged children. And it is so much fun. So I highly recommend it. Whether you're a parent who wants to bring your kid, or if you're someone who would like to volunteer and be part of the process, it's extremely rewarding. So that is one event that's coming up.
I just want to, real quick, before you go to the next one, I just wanted to ask about the Upstander. I mean, that sounds fantastic. Kids are amazing. I love their minds. They just take me to new places. Does the training reinforce that the danger of being the only upstander, like how much you need the second person and more, because so that like one individual and trying to interrupt something about to happen that could be violent doesn't become the next target. I used to work with bullying in schools, and that was such a huge issue. So I imagine you guys reinforce we need more than one person.
Well, and the tools are not just necessarily jump in there yourself either. So it does also involve going and telling a trusted adult, for example. So not necessarily like throwing yourself in the middle of the situation.
That's important.
Setting your children up to get endangered.
Yeah, well, that's important because some kids just are so protective. They will do that. They will literally throw themselves between two people
Right.
and get hurt, but before they realize, oh, I actually could have gotten help first.
Yeah, so October is anti-bullying month, so that's why we hold Upstander Carnival in October. And this year we're also doing something new where we are having a training for adults as well. And so we have a bystander intervention training on the following weekend, and that will be on Sunday, October 23rd, starting at 12:30 p.m. And it's over Zoom, so you can join from wherever you are. But we need 80 participants in order for this workshop to actually happen. So
Cool.
folks can go to our website or to our Facebook page and sign up to register. And please do that as soon as possible so that we can guarantee this happens.
That's an
But
awesome number.
we're partnering with an organization called Right to Be, and
Mhm.
they are this is what they do. They do different types of bystander intervention trainings, and so this one is on street harassment, and it is specifically in
Wow.
order to get folks the tools to be that person who intervenes safely if you see street harassment happening.
Wow. Fantastic. I'm so excited. I will definitely spread the word on those two events and more. I just wanted to read something and then give you a moment for your closing statement. But I just can't resist how connected this is to our conversation. This is from what President Biden shared today when he was looking at the disasters in Florida about Yom Kippur.
Mhm.
At the heart of Yom Kippur is the universal truth that we are all capable of growth and improvement. Each of us has a role to play not only in healing the wounds we've inflicted on others, but in repairing the rifts in our communities, our country, and our world. As these days of awe come to a close, let us all take this opportunity to face the injustice and inhumanity in our world honestly and resolve to do our part to mend what is broken.
Mhm.
And thank you so much for creating these events where we can do our part, we can play a role, and just kind of reconnect to the kind of universal human compassion that empowers all of us.
Yeah.
And what would you like to say before we have to wrap up the show? Any final enlightening statements?
Goodness, no pressure. Um, so, I mean, I also have a consulting business. For educators, for parents, for institutions who are interested in learning more about these topics and how to be more inclusive and how to train staff and things like that to genuinely, like not performatively, but genuinely make a change in the culture. Either at home, if you're a parent, at school, if you're an educator, or in the institution, um, then, either I personally or Davis Phoenix Coalition, as an organization, we are here to support folks with that. And, this is, and so I just want to say, like, everyone needs to be educated about these things. Like, this isn't something that you're supposed to be born knowing.
Right.
The difference is whether you seek out getting educated about it or if you don't. And so having that curiosity and making an effort and um, having the willingness to learn, that's what makes the difference. And we are so gratified when people come to us wanting to learn.
Well put. Let me give you the opportunity to say for the listeners who aren't viewing the banners, can you please give the Phoenix Coalition website and an email address if anyone wants to contact you, and then I'll say my thank yous.
Sure. So our our website is Davis Phoenix Co, all one word, davisphoenixco.org, and you can email info@davisphoenixco.org in order to get in touch with us. On Facebook, we are Davis Phoenix Coalition, and on Instagram, we are at 2013 DPC, and you can reach out to us over any of those platforms.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your educating me today. Thanks for tolerating my questions. And I also love to thank our, I mean, that's what it's all about. I love it. I love learning. I'd like to thank our engineer, DJ, and our producer, Dean Piper, and our sponsor, Calvin Handy, and to thank all the listeners and viewers. And be sure to tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on W4CY Radio or Talk4 TV. And may we all have enriching conversations in diversity this week.
Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech